Have you ever found yourself wondering about, the real basics, like human identity, memory? Where does it all start?
It's a huge question.
Right. Well, today we're doing a deep dive into this really interesting paper. It's called Human Becoming, a Deductive Reconstruction of Emergence in the Human Timeline. Authors are Eric Hutton and Ralph Buchwitz.
Yeah, and what they try to do is pretty ambitious. They're using basically logic and just what we can observe to piece together how we as humans emerged. From biology right up to culture, it kind of challenges a lot of standard thinking.
Definitely. Their whole mission seems to be unpacking this model that avoids, let's say, easy answers. They look at physics, biology, cognition, culture.
And they see these recurring patterns,
Yeah.
things like recursion, memory, collapse, and return. These shapes, these forms, driving how we become.
Okay, so it promises some aha moments. Let's jump in. One of the first big ideas, and it's pretty radical, is that intention actually comes before thought or speech.
Right. That really turns the usual sequence on its head.
It does.
They talk about this subtle directionality of being. It's not quite desire, not quite a decision you're aware of. It's more like a fundamental pull, an impulse.
An impulse.
Yeah.
Existing before the conscious thought.
Exactly. So the model isn't thought, intention, action. It's more like intention, thought, expression.
Okay, that's a big shift. And they say this isn't just philosophy.
No, they argue it actually lines up with some scientific findings. And also, interestingly, with non-Western traditions, things like Vedanta, Taoism, Buddhism, they often describe a similar flow, right? Where the impulse isn't necessarily born from conscious thought.
So if intention is that fundamental, how does it connect to memory? You mentioned memory as a core theme. The paper has a surprising take on DNA, doesn't it?
It really does. We usually think of DNA as the master blueprint, the instructions.
Yeah, the command center.
But they argue, based on observation, that DNA isn't really creating new forms or predicting the future.
Okay, so if it's not a blueprint in that sense, what is it?
It's more like a record. It encodes successful patterns from the past. It stores remembered survivals.
Remembered survivals. I like that.
Think of it like an archive or maybe a ledger, constantly updated based on what works, what survives. It's evolution's filter written down.
And things like epigenetic markers fit into this.
Precisely. Those markers, influenced by experience, show how the environment interacts with that stored memory. It's not fixed, it's iterative, a record of successful adaptations.
Okay, so DNA is deep biological memory. Where does that leave? Well, us, our conscious awareness. This is another mind-bending part.
Yeah, this deduction is fascinating. They look at things like slime molds solving mazes, no brain there.
Right.
Or human reflexes, you pull your hand from heat before you consciously feel pain or decide to move.
Experiments show brain activity starts before we're aware of making a decision.
Exactly. Consciousness seems to lag. So the paper deduces it's not the initiator, it's the afterimage.
An afterimage, like a summary of what just happened.
Yeah, pretty much. It's the result of all these incredibly fast recursive feedback loops. Actions happen, models are built, successful ones persist, and consciousness is the snapshot, the summary report that comes slightly after.
Wow. So awareness isn't driving the bus.
It seems not, according to this model, which of course raises a huge question for you to think about.
Yeah.
If consciousness is the afterimage, where does that initial intention we talked about actually come from?
Okay, let's zoom out. The paper also talks about culture as memory, right, on a larger scale.
Yes, externalized memory. They point to early human behaviors, like Homo naledi burying their dead, possibly 300,000 years ago. That's way before farming.
Burial. So that's not just disposal.
They deduce it encodes the idea of return, a pattern. Same with fire. It starts as a tool, maybe, but becomes ritual. Culture is behavior solidified into repeatable, shared memory.
And this pattern thinking applies even to civilizations rising and falling.
Exactly. They observe that all known civilizations seem to follow patterns of rise and, importantly, collapse. And the collapse itself encodes memory.
How so?
Think about flood myths found across cultures after collapses, or stories of forgotten ancestors. The deduction is that collapse isn't just failure, it's a kind of pattern reset.
A reset, like wiping the slate clean almost.
Sort of. The flood story becomes a symbolic data wipe. A surviving temple might be like a backup drive holding essential knowledge. The survivors are the pattern seeds carrying the core code forward. Recurrence is built into the structure.
Okay, this framework is really broad. How does it connect to today? To science, maybe even AI?
Well, they see science itself as a very powerful tool for memory retrieval. Think about DNA mapping revealing ancient ancestry or trauma.
Uh-huh.
Or look at AI. The paper suggests AI, especially current forms, acts like a compression mirror.
Compression mirror, meaning.
Meaning it's incredibly good at taking vast amounts of human-generated data, our language, our patterns, and reflecting them back to us in compressed forms. It's recognizing and recreating existing patterns, not truly inventing something wholly new from scratch. It mirrors the memory embedded in the data.
So it's like physics searching for fundamental laws. Is that also a kind of memory retrieval? Trying to find patterns that were maybe intuitively grasped or encoded in ancient myths? Symmetry, recursion?
Precisely. That's the connection they draw. The processor chip becomes a modern kind of shrine holding patterns. Code acts like a hymn, structuring reality. And truth itself, in this view, is ultimately about memory returning, being reconstructed.
So this whole deep dive,
Hmm.
it suggests we aren't just writing our own stories moment by moment. We're more like the latest layer.
In a structure that's been writing itself for a very, very long time.
From stars down to silicon chips,
Huh.
the field remembers, the form returns.
Yeah, and their final point is quite profound. Maybe our task was never really to invent totally new things, but to reconstruct the patterns, the memories that were already there, embedded in the universe, in our biology, and our cultures.
Makes you think. So for you listening, what does it mean if intention really does come before thought? Or if your own consciousness is more of an after image, how does that change how you see your choices, your memory?
And maybe consider, what other ancient structures or patterns are we still trying to uncover, to retrieve, using the tools of modern science today? Definitely something to mull over.